Right. So, Fandom. The FNDM for Ruby, Bronies, Whovians, people introduce themselves with District or House of Hogwarts or whatever team vampire or werewolf they're part of. Whatever the hell you call yourself if you're into Steven Universe too much, and Undertale. Whatever you call the Undertale fandom. But holy hell, the Undertale fan. I'm not actually here to talk about any of those specifically today, though I would at some point like to acknowledge that Toby Fox can create fandoms basically at will at this point. And not just any fandoms, but fandoms that are ferociously persistent, creative, large, things that any game company would want their game to have. And I'm wondering how long it's going to take for somebody to realize that with real money behind them in order for them to take advantage of his capabilities. But that's neither here nor there. I actually want to talk about Metroid. Specifically, Samus Aran and what people think she is versus what the creators wanted her to be. And I guess in macro, how fandom crosses over to the original product and in what ways it may harm said product. Samus Aran is a space bounty hunter raised by aliens and known for infiltrating enemy strongholds single-handedly and killing everything that moves. The first game in the series allowed you to put in codes that saved your progress. One of those codes, the so-called Justin Bailey code, allowed you to play without her armor on, showing that she was indeed female. This was notable as there weren't many female heroines in video games at the time. The next game in the series, Metroid 2: The Return of Samus, is dumb. I really don't like this game, but I will admit that I didn't get a chance to play it until way after when I could actually emulate the game. I did think it was weird that the last boss in the game was also the first boss of Super Contra, though, but that's neither here nor there. It did establish that there was a continuity, as the only event that matters in the game is the baby Metroid being found, and that being the plot of Super Metroid, the next game in the series. Super Metroid is one of those epoch-defining games that if you didn't get a chance to play it while it was new, you kind of missed out. Not only was it a major thorn in the side of Sega, it was something of a masterpiece even then. The game really hit the atmosphere correct of what they were trying to go with Metroid. That was, we'll say, mitigated by really campy music, catchy but campy music, at least in the first game. Its focus on exploration and tight controls ultimately made the franchise endearing to even short-time fans of the series, ultimately popularizing the character of Samus Aran. I believe the next game in the series is Metroid Prime, but in every other location other than the continental US, Metroid Fusion comes out next. I believe in the same year, 2002/2003. This is important only for one reason, because this is the first time Samus speaks of another person, or at the very least another entity. We don't know that it's a person just yet. That is covered in Metroid Other M, but I'll get to that in a second. She says that for a person that does not like following orders, it's the second time in recent history that she's been forced to do that. Um, like her old CO is what she references. This is a deliberate line. They clearly want you to see this, to see that it's foreshadowing for something. I'm still surprised to this day that more people either A, didn't remember it, or B, didn't know it existed. To me, I didn't know what I know now. I didn't know then what I know now, but I thought that they were alluding that maybe Mother Brain was uh, her old CO, and that was their relationship beforehand, or something to that nature. I thought they were going to keep using the old characters and keep recycling them like they had with Kraid and Ridley and how they kept showing up. I was wrong. Fusion occurs at the end of the timeline, so her referencing in recent history the events that took place that made her follow orders that must have occurred in whatever chronologically came in the previous game, which is Metroid Other M. That game wouldn't be out until after the Prime series is passed, though, which means I do have to talk about Metroid Other M. Nobody liked this game when it came out, but nobody liked this game when it came out, not due to its gameplay, not due to its graphics, but due to one character. I believe his name was Adam. I'm shooting from the hip on this one. He is a ranking officer in the Federation Space Military, I recall, and he was Samus's commanding officer for a brief period when she rejoined Galactic Society from her time with the Chozo aliens. Chozo? Are they Chozo? Anyway, it is during this time that Metroid Other M flashbacks to. They call back to events during this time where Adam and Samus are working together. Samus is the problem child of the squad they show, and she frequently, I remember she shows her dissent by a thumbs down whenever he asks what everybody's opinion is in the squad, and they always give a thumbs up. Um, I think that this could have been. I'm not sure. I can't really critique this part of the story, but it's clear that. But she goes along with whatever he tells her to do anyway because she's shown to have respect for this guy. So here we have the one guy in the universe that Samus Aran, a woman known for going headfirst into enemy strongholds and killing everything, has respect for. Gameplay is a blend of the Prime series first person and isometric view that they made up, frankly, which I really never had a problem with that. The only issues in gameplay that come up with the game having having been preceded by Super Metroid are that Samus doesn't lose any of her powers per se, but Adam, her commanding officer, she meets her commanding officer on the station. I forgot to mention that the game takes place on. That she has to listen to him because it's Federation jurisdiction. She defers to his judgment and disables a lot of the power of her suit, and only uses them when she is allowed to by clearing it with Adam. This is in place of the normal pickups that exploration is supposed to give you in normal Metroid titles. This is a major sticking point for a lot of people. They find that Samus being subservient to a dude is frankly offensive, and I'm not actually doing this to address that. Actually, I know it sounds like I've been leading up to that point, but I'm not actually. My personal opinion is not something that my personal opinion on that issue is moot compared to the result of their collective voice, which I'll get to. I guess it's not fair to dump all of critics' expectations onto old Adam there, disappointments onto old Adam there. There is an encounter with Ridley, the classic Metroid nemesis, early on, if I recall, where Samus's post-traumatic stress disorder comes in. This is the first time that they've addressed it in game, and I will admit, this is weird, as if I recall correctly, she's faced Ridley once in Zero Mission, once in Metroid Prime, once in Metroid Prime 3, and then in Super Metroid. So for her to suddenly turn into a ball of fear against the guy is just bad writing. But I get they wanted to get it out. I get that the creator wanted to get it out that this guy killed her family and that it affected her, and I get that. It's just a weird call out by critics of the game for me, because they have to be able to get that they wanted, with so much of the game's continuity rooted in the rest of the material of Metroid. It's odd to me that they would purposefully gloss over that for a weak attack on a game that we already know has flaws as far as the writing is concerned. Though I can't say that I can talk about this anymore without addressing the elephant in the room, which is Team Ninja, creators of the Ninja Gaiden remakes and Boob Physics, the simulator. Uh, they haven't done anything but this game other than Dead or Alive or Ninja Gaiden. And I think that came through a bit, not in the gameplay, but you could the general tone of the reception of the game, Metroid Other M, was negative because of their involvement. They are known with a negative connotation because of Food Physics, the simulator. So when it was announced that they were dealing with Metroid, that pretty much tanked people's expectations for it. And I've got news for anybody that thinks that they were responsible solely for this, but the story was from Mr. Sakamoto, uh, Yoshio Sakamoto, the guy that was co-director and I think co-creator, if not the creator, of the first game in Metroid. So I'm going to read the quote. The story for Other M was definitely the product of Mr. Sakamoto at Nintendo. We definitely worked with them on the project, but that was all him. There were definitely things we learned from Other M by working with Mr. Sakamoto with Nintendo that we've applied to the Ninja Gaiden development. That's a quote from one of the Ninja Gaiden developers, basically saying he didn't do it. And that it was Sakamoto. I have to talk about Sakamoto here because it is obvious he has been um, the guy that writes for these games. He has known Samus from the very beginning. He has known this woman, and he has been trying to get her personality out, but might have been limited by whatever method that was limited. Maybe technology, maybe Nintendo told him no. He's even gone so far as to say he knows where he was the only guy who knew where Samus's mole was, and it was on the bottom side of her, left side of her bottom lip. He even said that his primary focus with Other M was to show Samus's personality because the Prime series had left many players with their own idea of who she was, and he wanted her to be consistent for any future titles. I'll put the link for all of this in the descriptions, by the way, just so you know I'm not pulling this out of my butt. So uh, he considered setting the game even where Metroid Other M is chronologically in the Metroid series. He considered where that is because, and I quote, it is so critical that without addressing it, we wouldn't be able to make new games that show Samus's adventures that take place after the events of Metroid Fusion. So he considers this game to be probably, as far as Samus's personality is concerned, the most important game that you could be playing. And the general reception of that is hostility from the fan base. The critics did not pan the game as I originally thought. I did some research. Uh, the fan base generally, Reggie even came out and said, "Hey, what did we do wrong? Metroid Other M is the only Metroid game, the only Prime Metroid game. I guess I shouldn't say Prime Metroid game. It is the only full Metroid game that did not break a million copies sold. People spoke with their voice. The only voice they had. They spoke with their wallets, and Nintendo noticed. But Nintendo did not notice in such a way as to be constructive. Nintendo is. I remember the Nintendo of the 80s, the guys that went after people for unlicensed merchandise and stuff of that capacity. The guys that wanted to be the only big name in the room. Um, I believe that's even how we got the Xbox, but that's a different story, I believe. Maybe I'll talk about that at a different time. Anyway, Nintendo is a soulless corporation. I remember one of my friends saying when I brought all of this up to him at the time, uh, that he said that Nintendo was being tone deaf, and I told him that if you think this is Nintendo being tone deaf, wait until you see the reaction. And then uh, it's been 4 or 5 years since Metroid Other M came out. But they finally announced at the 2015 E3 the newest game in the Metroid franchise, Metroid Federation Force. Metroid Federation Force has on. I have not seen much gameplay. I'm not sure anybody has. But at first glance, it has absolutely nothing to do with Samus Aran. There is, I believe she's completely gone from the system, from the game. I believe that she is not going to be added at a time. She's not going to be uh, playable. That's for damn sure. And the collective response to that was even more outcry, and that's kind of when I got mad at this whole situation, was because now you've completely confused Nintendo. As far as Nintendo is concerned, Metroid Other M, which is a fantastic production, I urge you to at least watch a playthrough of it if you don't actually play the game. If just for like watch all the cutscenes because the story is actually excellent, in my opinion. They do not have any idea why people reacted the way they did. They won't. They have no idea why Western audiences reacted with hostility to Metroid Other M. And you can see that as evidenced with this new game coming out. They think that they have removed the problem. People thought because of Mr. Sakamoto uh, being the definitive source for who Samus is, and them giving us that definitive version of Samus, and we hating it, us hating it, they take they take it out. So we get this game, which also seems to piss people off. So now they're in a catch 22 as far as corporate structure is concerned. We won't get another Metroid after this. This isn't. Well, some people might even say that this is even Metroid, but my overall point is that this the people who called themselves Metroid fans didn't even do. I wouldn't even call myself a Metroid fan, and I didn't even have to do research to know what I knew initially up to the Metroid Fusion part. Everything else I had to do research on, but they sure as hell didn't know it, or at the very least they didn't care about it, and it has damaged the the brand. And I'm not even talking about cash, but it's certainly damaged cash. It is, and I said at the time that this was happening, I said sarcastically, "Man, I can't wait for the next Metroid game in 20 years, which will be another remake of Zero Mission, because it's an unmarketable property as far as they're concerned." And, well, watch Federation. Watch what happens with Federation Force. It's supposed to be late spring 2016. This is being recorded in early March, so it's going to be coming out soon. Watch what happens with that game. Critics aren't going to like it. Or should I say, the reviewers aren't going to like it because it doesn't have anything to do with Samus, even if it's a solid game. The general fandom isn't going to like it because it has nothing to do with Samus, and Nintendo isn't going to make another Metroid. They're going to abandon it, and they're just going to keep Samus in Smash Brothers, I guess. There are obvious parallels at this point to Mass Effect 3 and, to an extent, the Steven Universe fandom, their desperate war to not have their fandom turn out like the bronies, and how that may or may not have resulted in the possible death of a girl over Tumblr. I forget how that turned out, but my point is with this not so cautionary tale is that we have definitive evidence of how a fandom had directly affected the prime material that it was supposedly a fan of, and it has done so overwhelmingly negatively. On the other hand, to be fair, perhaps one could consider Nintendo, and by extension Mr. Sakamoto, tone deaf for not altering their perceptions to what the more popular perception of Samus Aran was and the Metroid franchise as a whole. But at that point, you have assumed control over somebody else's artistic creation. One could even argue that given the unique nature of video games, especially now with the focus on video games being narrative, that that narrative does not exist until it is in the eye of the beholder, that it cannot exist without the player and their perceptions. And to that end, that Nintendo, and by extension Mr. Sakamoto, were incorrect in their interpretation. Then I have to go to the whole Mass Effect 3 ending debacle again, where I think BioWare's still backpedaling from that. But they did patch in a whole different ending because people didn't like it. I do believe that ending is actually the canon ending. The refusal ending is for anybody that's keeping track. But I don't think that's the correct way to move forward. Like, is gaming an art medium? And if so, then it's meant to mean whatever it means to whoever is experiencing it. It is not meant, there's no feedback loop in the creative process once you have the game in your hand. In that same vein, I find that the customer is rarely correct about these things. Anywho, my personal stake in all of this. I used to be really scared of the dark, like really scared of the dark, and I tried to hide it, but my parents knew, my brothers at the time knew. It was the summer that Super Metroid came out. I had actually scored a copy, and I was playing. That was the first Super Metroid was the first game I actually really cared about in the series. I really didn't like the first Metroid, maybe because I was too young and I didn't know what the hell was going on most of the time. I usually just ran around in lava pits and died. Anyway, I really dug the fact that Samus would just charge headlong into these dark, lonely, oppressing places and, well, kill everything that tried to kill her. Except for the animals that the speedrunners save. Or kill, based on what the donations say. And I told myself, if monsters in the dark exist, then so does Samus. If monsters in the dark come for me, then so will Samus. So I've lost a hero here. She's still around, but how much damage has been done by the so-called fandom here? How long until we get another Metroid game with a narrative on par with that was presented by Other M? Who knows? This is definitely where I should be bringing up how Cecil in Final Fantasy IV helped me overcome bullying, but we won't get into that. Until next time.